You're a liability, sailor, a lightweight. The jungle doesn't care about your test scores or your gender quotas. It's a living thing, and it eats people like you for breakfast. You'll be tapping out, begging for evac before the first night is over. The words, laced with the casual cruelty of unearned authority, echoed across the humid clearing. The crowd of hardened soldiers, mostly Green Berets and Rangers, shuffled their feet and offered a few scattered, nervous chuckles. They looked at Sergeant Rex Thorne, the lead instructor, a barrel-chested man whose voice was perpetually set to a condescending roar. Then they looked at her. Petty Officer Anya Sharma stood perfectly still, a compact silhouette against the oppressive green wall of the Panamanian rainforest. She was 5'5", her frame lean and wiry, lost inside her fatigues. She didn't look like a warrior, not in the way Thorne defined it. She looked like a linguist, an analyst, someone who belonged behind a screen, not on the bleeding edge of this final, brutal survival exercise. She offered no reaction to the insult. Her gaze remained fixed on the horizon, her expression unreadable. Her hands, however, were a different story. They moved with a slow, deliberate economy, checking the single strap of her minimalist go bag, ensuring the en-bloc clip of her knife was secure, her fingers tracing the worn wooden stock of the M210 rifle she carried as if it were an extension of her own arm. But the old colonel, watching from the shaded porch of the command hut, saw something else. He saw the stance, feet perfectly shoulder-width apart, a center of gravity so low she seemed rooted to the very earth. He saw the way her eyes didn't just look, but scanned, cataloging every shadow, every rustle of leaves. It was a posture of profound, predatory stillness. If you believe that true strength is measured not in words, but in deeds, type silence below. Thorne continued his tirade, basking in the nervous energy of his audience. He saw Sharma's silence not as discipline, but as fear. He mistook her calm for fragility. "This isn't some obstacle course back in the States," he boomed, gesturing wildly at the suffocating jungle. "Out here, every step can be your last. You get a snake bite, a festering wound, you fall into a ravine. There's no one to hold your hand. Can you carry a 200-pound man with a sucking chest wound out of a firefight? Can you navigate for 3 days in the dark with nothing but the stars, which, by the way, you can't even see through this canopy?" He paused for effect, letting his rhetorical questions hang in the thick, wet air. He then moved down the line, handing out maps and compasses. When he reached Sharma, he gave her a compass that looked identical to the others, but those with a keen eye might have noticed the slightest wobble in the needle, a tiny, almost imperceptible flaw. He handed her a water canteen that was visibly less full than the others. "You're light," he said with a smirk. "You won't need as much." It was a subtle act of sabotage, a way to stack the deck and prove his prejudice correct. He was abandoning her, setting her up for a failure that would, in his mind, validate his entire worldview. The other soldiers averted their eyes, complicit in their silence. They were all trapped in the gravity of Thorne's arrogance. But Sharma simply took the offered equipment. Her fingers brushed over the compass, and for a split second, a flicker of something. Not anger, not fear, but pure, cold assessment passed through her eyes. She gave a short, clipped nod. "Understood, Sergeant." The words were devoid of emotion, a simple acknowledgement of an order. She turned, and without a backward glance, melted into the jungle, a small figure swallowed by an immense, indifferent wilderness. The first few hours were sensory assault. The air was a hot, wet blanket you couldn't throw off. The noise was a constant, deafening symphony of insects, birds, and the unseen movements of a million living things. For the other trainees, it was a battle. They fought the terrain, cursing the thorns that tore at their clothes and the mud that tried to steal their boots. They saw the jungle as an adversary, a green hell to be conquered. For Anya Sharma, it was different. Once she was beyond the sight and sound of the outpost, her entire demeanor shifted. The quiet observer became an active participant. Her movements became fluid, efficient, a seamless dance with the environment. She didn't fight the jungle. She listened to it. Her pace was steady, rhythmic, conserving energy with a discipline that bordered on the sublime. She read the canopy for breaks in the light, understood the flow of water from the slant of the land, and identified the calls of birds that signaled the presence of predators or prey. She found a small, clear stream Thorne's map didn't show, refilling her canteen and purifying the water with a tiny, concealed filter. The faulty compass was a non-issue. She navigated by the sun, by the moss on the trees, by an internal sense of direction that was more reliable than any magnetic needle. That evening, as a torrential downpour began, she constructed a shelter that was a masterpiece of fieldcraft. A raised platform, a waterproof roof of layered leaves, completely invisible from more than 10 feet away. She was not just surviving. She was at home. Back at the command post, chaos was blooming. A frantic call had come over the radio just before the storm hit full force, swallowing all communications. A different squad, on a reconnaissance exercise in the treacherous northern sector, had been caught in a flash flood. Their last transmission was garbled, panicked, mentions of a landslide, a broken leg, and rising water. Then silence. Thorne, for all his bluster, was now a portrait of escalating panic. He barked orders, sending teams out into the blinding rain, but they were moving blind. The jungle that was his lecture hall had become his enemy. His men were getting bogged down, disoriented by the storm. Air support was impossible. They were losing time, and with it, any hope for the missing soldiers. The command tent was a tense bubble of static, shouted coordinates, and a helpless drumming of rain. Then, a figure emerged from the deluge at the edge of the clearing. It was so sudden, so silent, that the guards didn't see her until she was 10 feet away. It was Sharma. She wasn't bedraggled or broken. Her uniform was soaked, but she stood tall, radiating an aura of unshakable calm. She held no map. In her hand was a large, flat piece of strip bark. She walked directly into the command tent. The eye of the storm and the frantic energy within it seemed to momentarily freeze. Every eye turned to her. Thorne stared, his mouth agape. How? How did you get back here? He stammered, his arrogance washed away by disbelief. Sharma ignored him. She placed the bark on the central map table. On it, etched with the precision of a master cartographer, was a detailed map of the northern sector. It showed terrain features, streams, and choke points with an accuracy that shamed the military issue charts. And in the center, a small X was marked next to a note. Cave system behind waterfall. High ground. Likely position of stranded unit. The silence in the tent was absolute, broken only by the storm outside. Colonel Davies stepped forward from the shadows of the tent, his face grim. He looked from the impossible map to the calm, composed woman who had drawn it. Petty officer, he said, his voice cutting through the stunned atmosphere. Report. Sharma's eyes met his, a flicker of mutual, professional understanding passing between them. Track them from their insertion point, Colonel, she said, her voice low and steady. Thorne's teams are searching the wrong valley. The flood would have pushed them southeast into the ravine. The cave system is their only logical shelter. Her words were precise, technical, a stream of pure, unadulterated competence. Thorne was still sputtering, his mind struggling to reconcile the lightweight he had mocked with the quiet professional standing before him. That's impossible. No one could track in this weather. No one could cover that much ground. Sharma didn't even look at him. She looked at Davies. I'll lead the rescue team, she stated. It wasn't a request. It was a fact. Davies nodded once. Pick your men, petty officer. Thorne started a protest to reassert his shattered authority, but the colonel shot him a look that could freeze fire. Sergeant Thorne, Davies said, his voice dangerously quiet. You will provide Petty Officer Sharma with anything she requires, and you will accompany her. Perhaps you'll learn something. The public humiliation was surgical. Thorne, his face a mask of fury and shame, could only grit his teeth and nod. Sharma turned to two of the most experienced rangers in the tent. You, grab your medical kits and climbing gear. We move in 5-inch. She moved with a purpose that tolerated no argument. As she prepared, She was no longer an unassuming sailor. She was a weapon being unsheathed, a force of nature about to be unleashed upon the storm. The journey through the storm-racked jungle was a descent into a primal world of chaos. Wind howled through the canopy, and rain fell in solid, blinding sheets. For Thorn and the two rangers, it was a nightmare. They could barely see 5 feet ahead. The ground was a treacherous soup of mud and roots, and the noise was disorienting. But for Sharma, the chaos was a medium she moved through with terrifying grace. She was their guide, their protector, their ghost. She didn't seem to walk. She flowed over the terrain, her feet finding purchase where there was none. She communicated not with words, but with sharp, efficient hand signals that were visible for only a second in the intermittent flashes of lightning. Thorn, accustomed to being the loudest, most dominant presence, was reduced to a follower, struggling to keep up, his confidence eroding with every step. He watched her, and for the first time, he felt not contempt, but a profound and unsettling sense of awe. She wasn't just navigating. She was reading the very soul of the jungle. She would pause, tilting her head, listening to something he couldn't hear over the storm's roar, then change direction without hesitation. She pointed out a viper coiled on a branch, invisible to anyone else. She identified a patch of ground as unstable moments before it gave way. She was not a visitor in this place. She owned it. After 2 grueling hours, she stopped at the base of a sheer rock face, a waterfall crashing down its surface. It looked like a dead end, but Sharma pointed to a nearly invisible ledge behind the curtain of water. Without a word, she began to climb, moving with the speed and certainty of a lizard, and disappeared into the darkness. The rangers looked at each other, then at Thorn, their expressions a mixture of fear and wonder. They had been following a student. They now understood they were in the presence of a master. They found the missing soldiers huddled in the back of the cave, one of them pale and shivering, his leg clearly broken and crudely splinted. The senior man, a young lieutenant, looked up with wide, hopeless eyes as Sharma entered his refuge. Her arrival was like a prayer answered. She immediately went to work, her movements a blur of practiced efficiency. She cut away the soldier's pant leg, her hands gentle but firm. "Compound fracture of the tibia," she said, her voice calm and authoritative, cutting through the man's pained groans. "He's going into shock." She opened her medical kit, which was far more comprehensive than standard issue, and administered a saline lock and a dose of morphine with the skill of a seasoned combat medic. She directed the 2 rangers to prepare a makeshift litter while she expertly reset and splinted the bone, her touch both precise and reassuring. Thorn could only watch, useless. He had spent a career cultivating an image of the ultimate warrior, but here, in a real crisis, he was just a spectator. Sharma was the one in command. She was the one saving lives. Once the injured soldier was stabilized and secured, she turned her attention to the rest of the team, checking for hypothermia, distributing high-energy rations from her own pack, and restoring order with her quiet, unwavering confidence. She then planned the exfiltration, her voice never rising above a calm, technical tone as she outlined the safest route back. The journey down the rock face and through the flooded jungle was perilous, but under her guidance, it felt possible. She was the fulcrum, the calm center around which the entire desperate operation revolved. When they finally broke through the trees and saw the lights of the command post, the rescued lieutenant looked at Thorn and asked in a hushed, reverent voice, "Who is she?" Thorn didn't have an answer. He could only stare at the small woman leading them out of the darkness, his entire world turned upside down. The return to the command post was met with a wave of relief that quickly morphed into stunned confusion. The sight of Sharma, not only alive but leading the rescued team and their saviors, was a scene no one had been prepared for. Thorn stumbled into the tent, covered in mud, his face etched with exhaustion and a new, unfamiliar emotion, humility. He said nothing, simply slumping into a chair, avoiding everyone's gaze. Colonel Davies, however, walked directly to Sharma. He looked at the rescued men, at the expertly splinted leg, and then at her. He didn't offer congratulations. He simply nodded, a gesture of profound, professional respect. Then he turned and walked to the secure communications terminal in the corner of the tent. A few keystrokes, and a personnel file illuminated the screen. The colonel turned back to face the assembled group, his eyes locking on Thorn. "Sergeant," he began, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the tent. "You called this sailor a lightweight. You judge her based on her size. You made an assumption. And in our line of work, assumptions get people killed." He pointed a finger at the screen. "Let me tell you who you abandoned in the jungle. Petty Officer First Class Anya Sharma. Service, 12 years, Naval Special Warfare. Last duty station, Naval Special Warfare Development Group." A murmur went through the tent. DevGru, SEAL Team 6. A legendary, almost mythical unit. The colonel wasn't finished. Qualifications: Lead Instructor, Jungle Warfare School, Coronado. Lead Instructor, Seer Level C. She's an expert in tracking, evasion, and unconventional warfare. She has more log combat hours in jungle environments than everyone in this tent combined. Each word was a hammer blow, dismantling Thorn's reality piece by piece. "Petty Officer Sharma wasn't here as your student, Sergeant," Davies concluded, his voice like ice. "She was here on my orders. She was evaluating you." The final revelation landed with the force of a physical impact. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum of shock and awe. Every soldier in that tent, men who prided themselves on their toughness and perception, now looked at Sharma with new eyes. They weren't seeing a small woman. They were seeing a legend in the flesh. They were seeing a Tier 1 operator, a quiet professional whose competence was so profound it needed no announcement. She was the ghost you never saw, the whisper you never heard, the expert who had forgotten more about their craft than they would ever know. Thorn looked as if he had been physically struck. The color had drained from his face, leaving a pale, sickly gray. The foundation of his identity, built on a bedrock of arrogance and prejudice, had been pulverized into dust. Colonel Davies turned his back on the disgraced sergeant and faced Sharma. He drew himself up to his full height, his posture ramrod straight, and executed a salute as crisp and formal as any he had ever given. It was not the salute of a superior to a subordinate. It was the salute of one warrior to another, an acknowledgement of skill that transcended rank. "Report, Petty Officer," he said, his tone respectful. Sharma, who had stood impassively through the entire reveal, returned the salute with economical grace. "All personnel accounted for, Colonel," she replied, her voice still quiet, still calm. "The stranded unit is stable. My evaluation of this training program, however, is not." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "There are vulnerabilities in the command structure. Assumptions are being prioritized over assets. It's a liability." The irony was so thick it was suffocating. She had used Thorn's own word against him, not with anger or malice, but with the cold, irrefutable precision of a diagnosis. The lesson was complete. The story of what happened in the Panamanian jungle spread, not like wildfire, but like smoke, insidious, quiet, and getting into everything. It was whispered in the barracks, shared over beers in the mess hall, and typed out on secure forums connecting operators across the globe. The legend of Naga, the call sign they learned was hers, became a cautionary tale for the arrogant and an inspiration for the diligent. It wasn't a story about a woman besting a man. It was a story about professionalism eclipsing prejudice. It was a stark reminder that in the world of shadows and silent blades, the most dangerous person in the room is rarely the one making the most noise. Sergeant Rex Thorn was quietly reassigned to a desk job stateside, his career as a field instructor over. But the man who left the jungle was not the same one who had entered it. The humiliation had broken his arrogance, but it had not broken him. Months later, soldiers at his new post would remark on his changed demeanor. He was quiet, thoughtful. He was seen actively listening to junior soldiers, especially the women, his opinions now informed by a hard-won, deeply humbling wisdom. He had learned the most important lesson of his life, that respect is earned through competence, not demanded by volume. Back at the jungle warfare school, a new tradition was born. The impossible route Sharma had taken, the one she navigated by instinct and expertise through the heart of the storm, was unofficially christened Naga's Path by the instructors. Her hand-drawn map, the one etched on a piece of bark, was carefully preserved and framed. It now hangs on the wall of the main briefing room, a silent, powerful testament to true mastery. It serves as the first and last lesson for every new student who passes through those doors, a symbol of the profound truth that the wilderness answers not to pride, but to skill. Years passed. The jungle warfare school became a different place. Its doctrine was rewritten, incorporating the subtle, intuitive techniques that Sharma had demonstrated. The focus shifted from brute force survival to a more holistic understanding of the environment, teaching students to work with the jungle, not against it. The story of Naga was now institutional folklore, a foundational myth told to every new class of elite soldiers. It was used to dismantle their preconceived notions, to strip away their egos, and to rebuild them with a core philosophy of quiet competence. The instructors taught that your assumptions are your heaviest burden, and your silence is your greatest shield. They taught that the measure of a warrior is not how they act on a sunny day on the rifle range, but how they perform in the dark, in the storm, when no one is watching. Anya Sharma was never seen at the school again. She had moved on to other shadows, other missions, her work known only to a select few. But her legacy was permanent. It lived on in the improved skill of the soldiers who trained there, in the lives saved by the lessons she had taught without ever intending to. True legacy is not a monument of stone or a name on a plaque. It is the quiet, continued practice of excellence, passed down from one professional to another, a silent current running through the heart of a community. It is the understanding that the most valuable weapon is a calm mind, and the greatest strength is the one that never needs to be announced. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.